Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our program on this Lord's Day. We hope that you're doing well and that you're making preparations to worship God this morning. We would like to extend an invitation to you to join us at the Pyburn Street Church of Christ in services today. We will gather at 9 o'clock for Bible study, followed by worship at 9:50. We also will gather this evening at 6 o'clock for evening worship, and we also gather on Wednesday evenings also at 6 o'clock for midweek Bible study. Please know that a warm welcome awaits you and that we would love to have you as our visitor at any or all of these weekly services at the Pyburn Street Church of Christ. This morning we're going to conclude our study of the subject of angels by looking at two questions that often arise regarding angels. The first being this: what all forms have angels appeared in? Well, this is a very good question. And as we've gone through this series of lessons, we've looked at many accounts of angels appearing to mankind, but for the means of this lesson, let's go back and review some of those. In the very first mention of angels found in the Scriptures, we find cherubim. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse 24, it says that God drove out man, referring to the fall of man and man being driven from the Garden of Eden. And God placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Also, in a passage that we have yet to mention, 2 Samuel 22 and verse 11, and again in Psalm 18 and verse 10, we see a cherub appear to David with the Lord riding upon this cherub. The passage states, "And he rode upon a cherub and did fly, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind." Then, throughout the book of Ezekiel, we find numerous appearances of cherubs to the prophet Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 4 through 28, and due to our time restraints, we won't look at this entire passage this morning, but I would encourage you to go back at a later time and review this first chapter of the book of Ezekiel. For here we find cherubs described as having 4 faces, each with 4 wings, one face of an ox, and one of a man, one of a lion, and one of an eagle. They're described as having straight feet, and the sole of their feet as that of calves. Burnished brass appearance, men's hands under their wings, and this form of angel is only mentioned as appearing to mankind in the Old Testament. In Genesis 16:1, we see the first mention of a common angel, and this angel appeared to Hagar in the wilderness and instructed her to return home. Now, what this angel appeared as is not revealed to us, but like the appearances of other common angels, it's likely that it appeared to Hagar in the form of a man. In Genesis 19:1, we find the appearance of 2 angels in the form of common men coming into the city of Sodom to warn Lot about the coming destruction of that city. Moving on into Exodus 3 and verse 2, we see where an angel of the Lord appeared to Moses as a flame of fire out of a bush. And as we mentioned a few lessons back, angels were only able to be seen after God opened the eyes of mankind to them. In the account of Balaam, his donkey saw the angel with the flaming sword long before Balaam's eyes were opened to it. Friends, it was only after God opened the eyes of Balaam was he allowed to see what was likely a cherub. Next, we find the interesting account of the seraphim in Isaiah 6, verses 1 through 2. In that passage, we see that in the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah says, "I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. And above it stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly." We find here the appearance of another classification of angels. In this account, seraphim appeared unto Isaiah when he received his charge as a prophet. Now, these angels are described as having 6 wings. 2 of those covered the face, 2 covered the feet, and with the other 2, the angels flew. But then, moving on into the New Testament, we initially have the appearances of Gabriel to Zacharias and also to Mary. And Gabriel came to each of these individuals to foretell the births of John and also of Jesus, and we find this account in Luke chapter 1. In this account, the only describing feature that we find is the fact that the angel was standing. We don't find any other description of their physical characteristics whatsoever. We next have the account of an angel appearing to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane in Luke 22 and verse 43. But once again, no description is given of this angel as to its appearance. But what is probably the most vivid description of angels that we find in all of the New Testament is the appearance of angels at the tomb of Jesus. In Mark 16, verse 5, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome have arrived at the tomb, and entering into the sepulchre, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a long white garment, and they were afraid. This image of a young man clothed in a long white robe or a garment is the typical New Testament image of angels, and we find several instances where angels appeared in this form. We notice from Matthew's account in Matthew 28 verses 1 through 4, in this same record of these ladies coming to the tomb of Jesus, it says that in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to the sepulchre. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door, and sat upon it. His countenance was like lightning, and his raiment was white as snow. And for fear of him, the keepers did shake, and they became as dead men. Now notice the description of the angel. Countenance as lightning, and raiment white as snow. And lastly, notice Luke's account in Luke 24, 1 through 4. Now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came into the sepulchre, bringing the spices with which they had prepared, and certain others with them. And they found the stone rolled away from the sepulchre, and they entered in, and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. And it came to pass, as they were much perplexed thereabout, behold, 2 men stood by them in shining garments. Then in Acts chapter 1, verses 10 and 11, you find the last recorded instance of an appearance of an angel, where the angel's form is described. In this account, Jesus had just ascended out of sight, and his disciples were still standing there gazing into the heavens, trying to get that last glimpse of Jesus. And while they stood there looking steadfastly toward heaven as Jesus went up, the passage said, Behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus which is taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. Friends, this is the last recorded description of an angel who appeared to man, unless you consider the beasts in Revelation 4 and also chapter 5 to be seraphim. In that case, that would be the last appearance. Therefore, we find that in the Old Testament, angels appeared to man not only in the form of man, but also in their own natural forms, as cherubim or seraphim with wings and multiple faces and all the other features that they had. But whenever we come into the New Testament, we find something different. We find that the angels that appeared to man in the New Testament, at least the ones that were described, were always in the form of men. Only the examples in Revelation where John is seeing their appearance as they appear in heaven are they described in any other form. The second question that we want to consider this morning is this: what do we know about what angels are doing today? Well, this is another very good question, but it's a little more complex to answer. There are some religious scholars who claim that angels no longer have anything to do with mankind. Some believe that angels are living among us. Some believe that angels continue to appear to man. But what do the scriptures say? Well, let's begin by looking at Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 14. Here the writer says, "Are they," referring to angels, "not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation?" Well, from this passage, let's take note of just a few things. First, this question is framed in such a way as to denote an answer of yes. Therefore, angels are ministering spirits sent to minister unto Christians. But secondly, the tense of this verse is present tense. This means that what this verse says is in a continual form. Therefore, we can see that angels continue to be sent out by God as need be. Angels continue to serve as servants to children of God. But then the question arises, how do they do this? Well, in the Old Testament and also in the first century, angels are described as carrying out these missions in a miraculous way. Now, we cannot determine that to still be the case today. The New Testament is very clear that with the coming of God's perfect Word, that the age of miracles would come to an end. We notice this in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 8 through 10. But in this passage, we also find the authority to state what I just stated, that the age of miracles would come to an end. The things mentioned in this passage were miraculous works that were used in the spread of the early church. And once the church matured and had the complete inspired word, these things were not necessary anymore. Well, this truth is again taught in Ephesians 4, verses 8 through 16, that until the truth was complete, and you had this one united record, these miraculous things were necessary in order to maintain the unity of the truth. Now, these things are no longer necessary. So what does all this mean? Well, what this means is that angels do not appear to mankind anymore. They do not come to us and reveal messages to us or to protect us or to guide us through some form of outward display. And since this supernatural era is one that has passed, we have only God's providential care. Therefore, we can conclude that God employs angels to assist in carrying out His providence in our lives. God makes the plans, angels carry them out for Him. Now, what we have said thus far is the only reasonable conclusion that we can make from what the Scriptures teach concerning angels today. Anything further would be simply speculation, and there's no legitimate documentation of angels appearing to mankind today, nor do we find any reference after the first century of them taking on the form of man or appearing on earth. In those days, they were utilized as messengers of the truth, and today, with the truth completed, that task is no more. Therefore, we can deduce that they do not appear to us today. But what about Hebrews 13, verses 1 and 2? Well, in this passage it says, "Let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware." Well, the writer of Hebrews in this passage is likely calling the people to remembrance of Abraham and Lot's behavior when they were visited by angels who appeared as mere men. The message here is not one of a factual nature. This passage is not stating that angels are going to come and appear to us today. But what this passage is teaching is a lesson in hospitality. He is saying that we need to be hospitable because we may not always know who we're coming into contact with. And it is a duty of all Christians, and especially of elders and deacons, to be hospitable to every person regardless of their outward appearance. They need to show the same love and the same compassion to every individual. And while this passage teaches a wonderful lesson that we all need to look at and apply to our lives, it is not dealing with the appearance of angels to mankind today. Friends, I hope that this has answered these questions satisfactorily, and we've learned a great deal over the last few weeks about this very important subjects. Angels are very important. They are wonderful beings who have a major part in the history of the world and will have a major part in the transition into the life that is to come. Friends, we want to thank you for joining us for our program today, and we pray that God blesses you with a wonderful Lord's Day.